Bob Colacello is a writer, is a photographer, is a curator, and is a great friend. He was born in Brooklyn, and then grow up in Long Island, but he moved afterwards to study in Georgetown. And in Georgetown University, Bob studied in the School of Foreign Affairs. They moved to New York again, which is the core of your career, where you really live almost all your life. And there you study film. You met Andy Warhol, you become the right hand of Andy, and you develop and become the editor of Interview, which has been an iconic magazine in the world of art. Also, you have worked in Vanity Fair, you have done thousands of photos who have been exhibited in museums and in galleries. But it just happened, and this is the title of the book that we will talk later, that I went to visit the exhibition that you did in New York at the Gallery of Vito Schnabel. And I was immersed, I was absolutely attracted and seduced for your images. And although I knew you since years and I knew your work, the world that Vito and Shai Schnabel with the team of Vito Madeleine in the gallery, the curatorial approach that they had to that exhibition was absolutely extraordinary. So that I thought I have to bring these photos to Madrid. And I read your memoir, Holy Terror, that I think you published in 1990, that the New York Times titled like the best ever written memoir about the inner circle of Andy Warhol. I read it at the time. At that time, I have never met you. And it was amused, it was interesting, it was attractive, and it's something that bring me to the world of the 70s in New York. I said, I have to know more about that. And when I saw the exhibition in New York, that I think it was in 2019, I think.
You're early.
Your memoir, your exhibition, your friendship, and how we have been together in the last year here in Switzerland in the winter, and your multitask talents that you have, and I have been witness of that, how you curate some of the exhibition here in the Gallery of Vito in St. Moritz. I thought this is an holistic approach to the world of art, and the world of art in some time, and also the people around that of the 70s that never again had been repeated. I think that time was absolutely essential of what happened after. I would like to begin to ask you, how was that time? How you become friend and right-hand man of Andy, how you developed the magazine. How was that time? Because for those like me that I didn't live it, I would like to hear from you how it was, how you can describe it.
Well, you know, the 1970s in New York, which is kind of the center of the art world by that point, the international art world even. And you know, the baby boomer generation, which I'm part of, those of us who were born right after World War II, and we grew up probably the most affluent generation in America, the first generation where women went to college in very large numbers. We got very caught up. We were in college during the later part of the 60s cultural revolution, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Andy Warhol was one of the symbols of that 60s era, you know, with pop art, with his movies like Chelsea Girls, where for the first time in an American movie, you saw people actually smoking pot, shooting up heroin. I mean, you know, boys kissing boys, girls kissing girls. This was like, we never saw this. You know, America was a very puritanical country. So there was this explosion in the 60s that carried on to the 70s. But I think what happened in the 70s is, in 1974, Nixon was forced out of office. Watergate was over. The Vietnam War then ended. So my generation, who had been protesting since the 60s, now we finally could sort of celebrate and just have fun. At the same time, this new music called disco started coming out of the black clubs, because it was black dance music essentially, into the gay clubs, and in New York especially. And, you know, so the fashion designers like Halston and Giorgio Di Sanangelo and Calvin Klein, they were bringing all the models, the beautiful girls, to the gay bars to dance to this great new music. So then the straight guys started going to the gay bars because they wanted to meet the beautiful models, the girls. And this led ultimately to Studio 54 in 1977, which became the archetypical gay bar that was beyond a gay bar, that was everything.
You go every night there?
Almost every night, yes. It was closed on Sundays.
Everybody there?
You could dance with Diana Ross 1 minute and Truman Capote the next. It was, we wrote in a book I did with Andy called Exposures of his photographs that Studio 54 was a dictatorship at the door and a democracy on the dance floor.
Wonderful definition.
Steve Rubel sort of had to pick you out to bring you in. Of course, because I worked with Andy, was the editor of Interview, I just was whisked right in. But once you were in the club, it didn't matter if Moishe Dayan was standing next to Vita Scarolitis, the great tennis player, next to Iman. Everybody was mixing and mingling, and lots of young people, blacks, whites, gays, straights, rich, not so rich. I mean, it was, and I think the 70s had that spirit of openness, of newness.
And freedom.
And freedom. And would really, even if you, you know, even if you weren't going to bed with someone different every night, you sort of knew you could. Love was in the air. But cocaine was like new. Jimmy Carter's Surgeon General said cocaine was not addictive. It was like pot. We now know differently. But so we were not out. It wasn't a self-destructive moment. It was a moment where we just wanted to stay up all night and dance some more and have fun.
And also all of you had this kind, as you say, freedom and love was in the air. So you built for the future, but now they are not an equivalent of.
Well, you know, AIDS came along in the early 80s. AIDS really, by 81, 82, so many of the very same people who were in the vanguard, let's say, of this disco moment, especially a lot of gays, a lot of creative people started dying of this mysterious illness that we knew was connected somehow to sex. So that put a damper on things. Then the Reagans came into the White House, who brought back a traditional, the Reagan years were really an attempt at restoring the traditional values of the American bourgeoisie, let's say, the American religions.
And it was then when
in the 60s.
Was then when you meet your dear friend, to whom you devote the book that we are going to talk after about, and it will be published by Ivorypress, and is published by Ivorypress in 2021, but we will launch it now. Thomas Amann, is when you met him?
I met Thomas in, well, no, we met already at about 74, 75, when he was still—
When you were editor of—
Bruno Bischberg. Yeah, I was editor of Interview. Just to explain how I met Andy and why I called this book and this exhibition, it just happened. I mean, it just happened that I decided I didn't want to be a diplomat anymore. I graduated Georgetown Foreign Service School. I wanted to be a filmmaker. This was 1969, when the Italian and French avant-garde movies were dominating the cinema. Even in the US, you could see those movies in many theaters. Godard, Truffaut, Fellini, Antonioni, Visconti, and so on. Like many in my generation, I got caught up on this idea of becoming a filmmaker. So I went to Columbia University Graduate School of the Arts, majoring in film. Turned out I wasn't so good at making these little movies. I could never figure out how to get the sound connected to the picture on my 16mm camera. But for film criticism class, I was very good at writing film reviews. And the professor, Andrew Saris, from the Village Voice, which was the hip political and cultural weekly newspaper in New York, he would publish my reviews in the Village Voice. And Andy Warhol and Paul Morrissey, who directed his film, started reading my reviews. And one day I get a phone call. I'm back living with my parents in the suburbs because it was too expensive to have my own apartment in Manhattan at that point. And I get this phone call from this guy who says that he's the editor of this new magazine Interview that Andy Warhol just launched. And Andy wants to meet me and maybe I could write for the magazine. So it just happened. I mean, other people would
you accepted right away.
Yeah, I couldn't wait to go meet Andy. My parents were like, we forbid you. You know, my father was like, isn't this the guy who makes movies about boys who want to be girls? You know, because he again was the first to put drag queens in his movies. So, you know, it just happened. I mean, I went to meet Andy, we hit it off. I think growing up Italian American, you sort of learn to be with people all the time and get along with people, and you learn like how to. I always say, you know, when I met the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and the Agnellis and have these lunches with these fancy ladies like Sal Schlumberger or Nan Kempner, it reminded me of my grandmother in Brooklyn and her sister and cousins gossiping about whatever lady wasn't there, you know. And it was, so for me, I don't know, I have an ability, I think, to just get along with people. And Andy saw that. Andy right away said to Fred Hughes, his art manager, we should take Bob with us when we go to Paris and Italy, and because he can talk to anybody and he can help us sell the art.
Talent of empathy. If I have to think in one friend in New York that I can see in completely different tables at dinner in New York, that, as you know, is a lot of ghettos in New York. Huh?
Yeah, a lot of cliques.
Political, social, cultural, edgy. Right. And who is there? Bob Colacello. Bob Colacello always is in every table, which is interesting, stimulating, and you are alone and everybody loves you. I think it's a talent of empathy, and also because you, in the years that I know you, and mainly in the last year and a half working with you, is one very rare virtue or value, which is the generosity, to give without expecting anything. And you are like this. And I saw you also in a dinner with key individuals in the political life and social life in New York, and everybody was Democrat. And you were the only one which was Republican. You remember?
Yeah.
But if he's X, which was Republican, on, I will not vote for. You have the flexibility, the freedom, the courage to express your views, political views, always based in common sense, without the fear to be rejected or to be excluded from one group. And this is something that everybody, including myself and my husband, saw since the beginning. So I think Andy Warhol made quickly an insight of you and said, I need Bob in my factory and doing my interview magazine.
Well, I think, first of all, you know, being a Republican in the New York art world and the New York media world was always people, even at Vanity Fair, all the years I was writing there, and Graydon Carter was, you know, very anti-George W. Bush, very anti-Donald Trump. I was not for the Iraq War. I think Donald Trump is a complicated figure, let's say. But I think people saw me a little bit as, you know, being Republican. Part of it is my iconoclasm. Probably if I lived in a very right-wing place, I'd be like in Utah or Wyoming, I'd be a Democrat, because I don't like orthodoxies. I don't like where everyone thinks the same automatically. They don't even know why they think that way, you know? Also, I think the Factory and then later Vanity Fair were the perfect places for me, because both Interview and Vanity Fair covered a wide variety of subjects, of people. So I could, with Interview, we sort of invented this thing called the mix, where we wanted every issue to be like a great dinner party, where you had a big superstar like Mick Jagger on the cover. And then you had Paul Volcker, the head of the FedEx, doing the serious interview. And then you had 2 or 3 beautiful models, male and female, who, you know, just there for the beauty, for the frivolity. I've always just, you know, and New York, yeah, like you said, now it's much more clicks, and I do have an ability to jump around those clicks, because both my jobs, that Interview at Vanity Fair, I was not just covering politics or just covering theater or just covering art, you know, or society. I did stories on everybody from Nan Kempner to Nureyev, from Balthus to Nancy Reagan, you know, and I like that variety, and I think that's what makes life interesting.
And I think something that in the exhibition that we are going to present in Ivorypress, when you go through the 85 photographic images that we have chosen together, you see that variety of personas that you came across, and with your little camera, I think it was a very little camera, no? That you were always.
It was very small. It was the Minox. It was the first 35mm camera that was miniature size. Before that, the miniature cameras took 16mm film, which was half frame. It was not professional. You could not use those.
But your photos are extraordinary. It's more a sociological overview of time, iconic time in New York. I see it like history.
Because, you know, I wasn't a photographer. I was editor of Interview magazine. So, and as editor of Interview and working with Andy, I wasn't even really like a journalist. I was more like part of the whole group, you know. And so people trusted me, and they didn't, when I slipped this camera out of my jacket pocket, they didn't even notice. And I usually I always say I like to photograph important people doing things that aren't important. You know, I didn't want people posing with their arm around each other. I just was doing a little documentation of what I saw. And I would get, after, you know, Andy would take 20 rolls in a night, and he works so hard. I was lucky if I took 1 roll, because then I'd have a few drinks and whatever. And I'm like, oh, I've done enough now, you know. You know, Andy was always an outsider, even in when he was in an insider place. I was more of an insider in a way. I adapted myself to whatever scene I found myself in. You know, first of all, you know, I talk a lot, so that helps, I guess. But
no, I
see myself as an observer, but a very close-up observer, you know.
No, all your images, from the one I remember now, the son of between that you are there, Andy with Truman Capote, or with Boyce, or with Roy Lichtenstein, or Robert Reisenberg, or Mapplethorpe. All that images are so natural. You, as a viewer, you are in it. You are part of the party. That is the impression and my feeling and my absolutely seduction when I visit Vito's Navel gallery with your work. And we are trying with the team of Ivorypress to do something not equal, but similar, to convey to the visitor that he feels inside the audience.
Right.
Because the photos are so alive, so psychologically full of feelings, life, and you feel very close to them. You feel
Well, they're natural. They're natural. The
Mm.
people are being natural because as the person taking the picture, I'm natural. But I mean, it was normal friendships, you know, and many of the people are not famous. Some are superstars, but you know,
No, we have make, as you know better than me, although we did it together, but all the images that the public will be able to see at Ivorypress is a mixture of many figures. Some of them are very well known. They are universal icons, global icons. Others are not, but they have such a strength, and without seeking it, you get a magnificent purity in the technical approach to your photos. And we thought it was very worthy not to do a kind of parade of celebrities, but show your way how you do an X-ride of society during 10 years. That was the...
and you know, there are a lot of pictures of European aristocrats, but the young, I mean, for example, there are pictures from the wedding of Princess Minnie de Beauvau-Crayon to Duncan Claret in Nancy, France. Now, she's not well known, but she's a direct descendant of Louis XIV. This chateau is amazing. And I was the only photographer person taking pictures there, except, you know, except for a few formal shots by the professional photographer. And in those pictures, some were published in an interview magazine to go with my out column. And the reader then felt they were going to someplace they wouldn't ordinarily go. And it's a form of history, I think, to see how,
it's pure,
you know,
it's a very alive way to visit the history that is not written.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm as interested in someone like myself who comes from Brooklyn to start out with, as someone who, I mean, I did a story in Vanity Fair on former King Juan Carlos of Spain when he was in a mess. And, you know, for me, people like that are the living embodiment of the history of their country. That's what fascinates me. How do you function in a modern world when you know every relative you've had for 800 years? You know, but what's interesting is to mix people like that. And this is something Andy did. This is something I think I learned to do from him, is to mix people like that with people from totally other worlds. And people from different countries, people of different sexual preferences, of different artists with diplomats, you know, athletes with musicians.
Social diversity.
Yeah. Also, I want to
diversity of the world. No, what is life about?
Yeah, and you know, and the great thing about New York back then, more than now. First of all, you could live very cheaply in New York, in Manhattan, because we were in recession. It was not, young people flocked to New York in the 70s, people who wanted to become artists, writers, journalists, models, make it in advertising, architecture. They would come from all over the country and the world to live in New York. And so there was that youthful energy, and the establishment, let's say, was much more open. Andy was probably the most open. The factory was not, the door was not closed, you know. And Andy loved young people, and he encouraged young people. Look, he made me editor of his magazine at 22 years old. Vincent Fremont was 19. Yeah, Vincent Fremont was 19 when he started making videos for Andy. and basically keeping control of his checkbook. I mean, you know, Andy just, he had a nose for like what your talents were, and then putting you in that position and letting you do it. He was not looking over my shoulder saying, this is, put this photo in an interview, take that one out. No, when a new issue came out, he would go through it and count the ads. Oh, 40 pages of advertising. Is that more than last time? You'd say, yeah, last time was 35. Oh, that's good. You know, I mean, Andy was in a funny way about quantity more than quality, because his attitude was just do it. And if it wasn't fast, easy, cheap, and modern, then it means you're doing the wrong thing. If it cost a lot of money to do, if it was too hard to do, and it wasn't fresh and new, you were on the wrong track, you know? And this was very creative, that it was very, it was exciting.
You freedom to work, to decide, to do whatever you like in every number of interviews.
Yeah, but I also at the same time would go to Andy or would go to Fred Hughes. But at the beginning, Paul Morrissey was very involved. And I would ask their opinion. Or if Paul Morrissey said to me, oh, run these photos of Joe D'Alessandro because he's going to be in our next movie, I would run them. You know, I did see myself as working for not one boss, but several bosses, because then Peter Brandt invested in the magazine, was a great, big, young art collector. So, you know, we would have meetings and I would take into account what they were saying, but they weren't over my shoulder. And I mean, nobody was telling me how to do layouts, or I couldn't do an interview with someone, or not, you know, hiring Fran Lebowitz, for example. She was someone like Glenn O'Brien, who was my deputy editor, she was driving a taxi and she was from New Jersey, you know, and he realized she was very funny. The next thing, you know, we knew she was writing a film criticism column for us called The Best of the Worst, which was so critical of most of the films that the big studio said, we're banning interview from the screenings, the press screenings. And so I said to her, you know, friend, you can't write about movies anymore, but you're against everything. You complain about everything in life. Why don't you write a column just complaining about earth shoes, which were very trendy then, or about whatever, you know? And we came up with this title, I Cover the Waterfront. I didn't go to Andy for permission to do any of that, you know? And
how do you think Andy will react to your book? It Just Happened. The book,
well, I think he'd love the photo on the cover.
Ivorypress, that it will be on the books shelves and bookstores at the end of this year. It's already distributed in America and Europe and Asia, and will be, I think, if all goes well with this current situation in the world, but it's available from Ivorypress. It's called It Just Happened, photographers of, and we have designed it in order that it is seen as an album of the time.
Yes, which was your idea, actually.
Here,
and I got it right away.
So generous, because you wrote for every picture, every image in black and white. You wrote by hand who was and where was the photo, and then you wrote, like here with the Carters, you wrote a text explaining what was your relationship with them and also what was about. And here, this is I see it as a handbook of social, cultural, artistic biography of the times in New York. Here is the who is who under your eyes and through your eyes, in a very spontaneous way, what happened in the 70s in New York, and also outside New York in some cases, like in the summer house of Andy, and what was the environment. And this is an extraordinary overview of what, like here I see Greg Allman and Chair.
Kissing at the White House.
What is
At Jimmy Carter's inauguration.
Yeah, and here we see Warhol in exhibition, or you see, you know, Mike Jagger, you see everyone, Marisa Berenson, everyone, Diana von Furstenberg, everyone who built what New York became.
Yeah.
And what do you think? All the ones who are alive, many of them still are alive, and they will receive the book, or they will, we will give them the book, or they will buy the book.
Let's hope.
I know how they are going to react, because I saw the faces and the reaction to individuals who are here who already sent the book. But those that they are not alive, and they appear very, very frequently, like Andy, no?
Yeah.
And other that already left us. What do you think? Do you think that Andy will tell you, no, Bob, you are impossible. You just put together all our life in several hundreds of pages?
I think Andy would just say, "Oh, gee, Bob, this is great. Oh, gee, oh, Elena's so great." No, you know, I think he would like his pictures on the cover, but it's just his boots with Diana Vreeland's boots.
Which are in the
I think he would say, "Oh, gee, that's really cool. Oh, wow. Why did you do that?" You know, I mean, the book, I even when I wrote my memoir, Holy Terror, which was 700 pages, I mean, the reviewer said I was always honest. I mean, I told the truth about people. I told the truth about myself also. And Fran Lebowitz said, you know, you managed not to be mean to anyone, but yet say what really went on. Because when I started writing, I thought, I can't write about all these famous people taking cocaine in the bathroom of Mick Jagger's townhouse if I don't explain that I was in the bathroom with them. Why would I know? You know, I mean,
and you do the same in the
but again, I go back to my grandmother from Naples, who came as a little girl to New York. She always said to me, Robert, it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. And I carry that all through my journalism, because you don't have to be snarky and sarcastic and judgmental about people you're writing about. If they had 4 divorces, you have to say they have 4 divorces, but you don't have to add a little disapproving remark, you know, as if we as the journalists never had a love affair we shouldn't have had, or never smoked pot, or never said something stupid, you know.
Yeah, I have a quotation of your acclaimed memoir, The Holy Terror, Andy Warhol Close-Up, of the New York Times, that said, the best written and the most killingly observed book in Warhol inner circle. Really is.
No, I think I can
we have the diary of Andy Warhol, but the diaries are much more, I would say, literal. I went with this taxi and I pay expense. Here you give, like in your exhibition in Vito's Navel Gallery in New York, and will happen also in the one in Madrid in Ivorypress, you make all of us participate of your reaction to your life and the life of others. This is my impression.
You know, again, as both a sort of accidental photographer and a journalist, I always saw my subject is people. And that's really what I'm covering, is people. I'm writing many biographies of people in these long Vanity Fair articles. I thought my job was to make the reader feel like, oh, I now have a better idea of what this famous person is like. I feel like I've had lunch with them. And you know what? I think they're horrible. And another person can say, I think they're so cool, because that's how life is. You know, you think I'm a nice guy. There are some people who think I'm not so nice.
You are a horror. I don't think so.
People,
I don't think so.
And there's no perfect people, and there's some people who are totally bad, like Hitler. But you know, most people, even if they're involved in some scandal or they did some things that are not so great to do, there's a side of them that's interesting and that made them get.
I remember
I mean, so many people.
Yeah,
their
no,
lives.
I remember once in a dinner in the house of Lynn, the legendary already Lynn Nesbitt, the literary agent, that their dinners were always, as you know, with writers and intellectuals, and I was. You were on my right, and in my left were Richardson, the biography of Picasso. You remember?
Mm-hmm. John Richardson, yes.
I was over the moon to meet him, and after we became friends until he passed away. And he asked me, "You are a friend of Bob?" And I said, "Well, I know him, not very much, because that was years ago. We spent some Christmas together, but I'm not as friend as you are, or Lynn is. I know him for several years." And he told me, "Well, keep this in mind. He's the best guy in New York. As I said, he's the best guy in New York. If you want to know in New York, you talk with Bob. Bob is in everywhere and has been in everywhere. And coming from him, is something, you know, make me part aware that you were deeply loved by many individuals, and that you are a legend alive, because you have not only the experience to be with artists, writers, or individuals who have make the profile what New York is about. New York before this generation was, well, we have the Freaks, and we have the Morgans, and we have all the collectors, thanks to Dubin and to Berenson, but they were not individuals that created the life in New York. They were more, they were writing their own path in the art world with their collection that now very generously they leave to all of us to visit the museum and the mansions at the time. But really the beginning of the life of what New York is about, and why all the young generation of my generation and still now are attracted to New York, were done thanks to everybody who lived the 70s. Before, New York was not New York.
John Richardson used to have the greatest parties, cocktail parties in the 70s. We had all the grand dames of society, and all the artists, and you know, Warhol, Lichtenstein, Francis Bacon from London. John's one of the great figures. I'm very touched that you shared this compliment with me. For Airmail, Graydon Carter's, new online Saturday journal, let's say, I just did a long article on John Richardson, a sort of memoir of John Richardson. He was one of the greats. One thing I wanted to say too is that today we talk about celebrities, and we mean people who are just famous for being famous, the Kardashians or whomever. Back in the 70s and long before, the word celebrity meant you were celebrated for doing something, for accomplishing your achievements, usually creative achievements. So Mick Jagger was a celebrity, yes. I mean, he was one of the great rock and roll creators. Truman Capote was a celebrity. Andy Warhol was, but they were celebrated for doing, because of what their achievements and their accomplishments. And so for me, it was such a privilege to actually be able to actually edit things that Truman Capote wrote for Interview magazine. But also, again, he was also a normal guy who had a lot of problems, he was complicated.
But he was a strong.
I mean, you know, it was, everything was more real, more authentic. I think today with social media, I mean, Andy said in the future, everyone will be famous for 15 minutes, but someone recently said in the future, everyone will be anonymous for 15 minutes. I forget who said that. It's such a brilliant thing
It's
because,
brilliant.
you know, we live in a world where everything's images, everything's, there's no rarity, you
But
know.
they are not, they are images, but without a rational, without a discourse. And when
Yeah.
I found in the book and how you organize the book and all the, because it's a book with your personal reflections about each of the images, or how you find to be at night in the apartment of Warhol, or how was that wedding, or how fantastic and fun was X and X and X.
Right.
Is a very readable, fun, cool, interesting, and deep. You are a great raconteur in this album, if we can call them an album from the.
Yeah. Well, you know, when you first proposed doing an exhibition and a book with Ivorypress of my photographs, you had said to me, I see it as a personal album, like an old-fashioned picture album that people would keep. And you had this idea that I should even handwrite the captions. And I came to Madrid for 3 days, if you remember, and started writing these captions. And I got up to about 1980. And then the rest I did in New York, and we shipped them to you. But I had done a book called Out with Steidl of my photographs back in 2007. It was very slick, full bleed. Sam Shahid did a great job as art director. But I think both you and I knew we had to do something very different and more cozy, more, you know,
that you take
like more personal.
You also read in the sofa in front of the fireplace, and you take it one day and another day and another day. You know, I have it here in the living room, and although I know by heart every of the images, I found myself that sometimes I sit and I go through it again. And I go, and always I discover a detail from a dress of Bianca Jagger or Kemper or Cher or whatever, Omar Berenson, the way of dancing, the way of moving, the way of embracing, the way of posing, the way of behaving, that you can read different levels in the images, depending of your mood and depending of your observation. And that it will happen also in the exhibition. In the exhibition, there will be, we have established an exhibition, a traditional exhibition of your images by categories, although not very strict and rigid. So the visitor can move from one environment to the other, but also very generously give us to be exhibiting the vitrines all the memoir, magazine, letters, photos, and paraphernalia in the good sense of the word, of all your life in New York.
I love that you again had this idea to
and this,
have this archival material, this memorabilia.
Ivorypress, so the people, the visitors, not only can see your images, but also what you were producing, how was your life. You leave us to have, you lend us all the some of the letters, important letters that you receive, exchanges, correspondence, other photographs that people took from you with personals of celebrities that give a story within the history of the whole exhibition. So they are a rational, they are a discourse, they are a line, they are a thread that goes to the beginning to the end of the exhibition. And it's an exhibition that I am completely sure when the visitor come, will go through once and will come back again. because you have to see it again. There are too much information and too much images, and all so strong, that I am extremely excited with the
Thank you.
to be able to open. We cannot suddenly open to the public because openly in November because of the situation of the COVID, but we will open by appointment, and the great launch with you will be able to be through 2021, and then we will make a great splash. We have to have another.
I'm looking forward to that. I think everyone's looking forward to making these when we can have those kind of occasions again.
Yeah, because we think that this is an exhibition that you cannot have it only with 10 visitors or 15 visitors, which allow now. So for the moment will be there to see by visitors or collectors or people or historians or curators who want to have an overview of the world of your world with Andy Warhol and all the great artists like Beuys and Liechtenstein and many.
And, you know, also, while there's so much on parties in New York and Los Angeles, London, Paris, the kind of jet set feeling, let's say, I also was able to cover both the Jimmy Carter inauguration and the Ronald Reagan inauguration.
Yeah, and they are there.
From the inside, with, you know, going to the White House, going to the private dinners. And so that gives you a sense of the larger scene, you know. And there's a couple of photographs and letters from Nancy Reagan, who I got to know quite well. And again, you know, it's like we put on the cover of Interview magazine in 1981 for Christmas. Bryce Martin's wife, Helen Martin, didn't speak to me for 10 years because of that. But, you know, again, I say it just happened. I mean, I met Nancy Reagan at the Cirque, and it just happened that she started calling me up. I mean, you know,
nobody can resist your
no,
friendship. That I am a witness of that. But one thing, perhaps last question or pre-last question. I saw you these years in dinners, lunches, and events with very, I would say, well-known and celebrities. And everybody, including myself, asked you why you don't have here your little camera. And you never again, I saw you with your camera. Why?
Well, when I left the factory, left Interview.
To express here which ones, but one of the big events, one of them precisely this year, in the beginning of the year, was everybody there, from New York, from France, from Greece, from Switzerland, Germany, UK, and you were there observing because your table was next to me. So I observe you, and I'm sure Bob is going to do photos of this because it was absolutely crazy and magnificent. You never took a photo.
Well, I don't have an iPhone, first of all, but when I left the factory, I felt, okay, now I'm going to be a serious journalist for Vanity Fair magazine, and I can't be taking pictures at parties. It's too Andy Warhol. It's too, I don't know, it was an idea I had in my head. So I put the camera aside. And at that wedding you're talking about in St. Moritz, people said to me, Bob, you should be taking, why don't you start taking pictures again? And at one point I asked my assistant to see if he could track down a Minox camera that was brand new from 1970s, you know, and I don't know, it didn't go anywhere, this search, but I guess I should just get a new digital camera and start taking pictures again. Maybe.
But I saw you.
Maybe I'll start at my celebration in Madrid.
In dinners and in lunches and in events I remember
everybody takes pictures
how
now with their phone,
we have a lot, and you never took a photo.
But
and I thought, perhaps it's one once in life have many chapters, and sometimes
I'm not really a photographer.
Yeah.
You know, it's only since Vito, since you and Stephen Casher really gave me my first big exhibition in New York, that people sort of started looking at these photographs in some sort of serious way. And I'm like, I can't believe what's happening, because this is something I did so long ago, and it's now coming to fruition, coming to the light. And I'm loving it, you know, but I have to think about that, about today, everyone takes pictures with their phone, you know, it's
all
like,
of this happen, I'm going to, that you have ready when you come to Madrid, you have ready exactly the same camera.
and black and white film. We have to have black and white film.
And when all of these nightmare and difficult and travel times finish, and then we can celebrate it together. I want that you have the camera, and although you will be the protagonist of the celebration, I will love, and everybody will love that you take photos. Of
All
course,
right, it's a deal. But I want to say,
but it will be a 2022, 22, because it has a great celebration of your magnificent, extraordinary historical album, and a testimony of 10 years or more of your being you a witness of the makers of what New York is about, and also the exhibition where every visitor will be feeling part of what it happened, because just happened, and it will happen that you will be there.
Yeah, I wanted to say one more thing, which is that, you know, I dedicated the book to Thomas Amann, who was the great Swiss art dealer and like a brother to me, who I met with Andy and Bruno Bischofberger, and who died in 1993. And I think I actually met you and Norman with Doris Amann for the first time, his sister, in St. Moritz. And when I go through the book, it's fun, and it brings back many fond memories, but there's so many people who are no longer with us in that book also. Steve Rubel, Halston, Truman Capote, you could go on and on. And, you know, so there's also a feeling of sadness, but more of gratitude that, like, I'm still standing, you're still standing, you know, that like Elton John sang. And
but it's a
I don't know, there's a lot of emotion in these pictures, because they are almost all of them really are friends, of people I had a connection to and who had a connection with me. And I see them more as documents of these friendships, of the time where these friendships were possible, because there was this freedom and there was this freshness. Even international travel was so really new, you know, in a way, that you could just get on a Concorde. Remember the Concorde?
I remember.
Be in Paris 3.5 hours. And New York was the center. Everybody came to New York, and everybody, whether from London, Paris, Rome, California, Florida, they all wanted to do two things: go to Studio 54 and have lunch at Andy Warhol's factory, because we would have great lunches again with great mixes, unexpected mixes of people. People love mixing. People love connecting to people they don't know, that are different. And we have to get that back. You know, we have to stop being in boxes and just seeing the people who agree with us or who do the same thing as us. It's so boring.
Yeah, be a drive for that, because it will happen like in 1920, it will be an explosion after a pandemic at the time in the 1918. Afterwards, a big explosion. And I don't have any doubt that afterwards, everybody will like, and I would love to embrace everybody to kiss everybody, to travel here and there, to have fun, to drink, to dance, and to go to the opening of Ivorypress exhibition of Bob Colacello and celebrate that night also going to bed with a book and a glass of champagne. What about that?
Elena, I cannot thank you enough. I really can't. And I love working with you because first of all, you're fast and decisive. When
Absolutely.
we came to New York and we went
this
through
life is very short and we have to enjoy it. In this moment, we have to enjoy it through the Zoom. But I do hope that in 12 months, we will be in another situation and I can embrace you, kiss you, give you thank you, and have your book with me.
Yeah.
And, thank you.
Also, I want to thank your team for Ivorypress, for Joanna and Valerie and Natalie, and also Vito's team and Vito himself, Madeline and his brother Sai Schnabel, because everyone put so much effort into this and we're so easy to work with, so agreeable. And again, you set the spirit, but people really know what they're doing in your press, and they get it.
They are all individually fantastic, and they put love and heart, and they were completely in love with you.